Hey guys, welcome back to the interview call. My name is Tyson Matsuki. I'm glad to be back, even if it's just for one episode. Back in October, when I announced the hiatus of the podcast, I did mention that I was going to make one more interview before the podcast can be finally laid to rest, and today I make good on that promise. Ladies and gentlemen, I am thrilled and honored to have with me Activision's community manager, Dan Amrich. Hi, Dan.
Hi, well now I didn't know that I was going to be like the guy that does the eulogy on your podcast. I didn't know that I was like, let's bury this sucker, and now I feel bad. I feel like if I had been on your show earlier, maybe the show would have gone on a little bit longer.
No, it's not that. It's that, and I'll explain my reasons. It's because that it came a time when doing the podcast stopped being fun and it started being work, and my own personal grievances with Call of Duty made it kind of say, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm just hanging my gloves, and that's it. That was back when I thought I had you for December, but then I read you back and said that you weren't available. So that's why there has been a 4-month delay in this actual talk, but more on that later, I suppose.
Yeah, the end of last year just turned into a nightmare for me.
Yeah.
So this is the first time I've been able to come up for air.
I suppose pretty much every launch of Call of Duty, and there was also a Skylanders launch, so you were pretty swamped down the way we were, right?
Yeah, pretty much October through December, because you combine in the holidays of Thanksgiving and Christmas as well, and people are traveling for a lot of those. So it just wound up being not a good time to do anything but focus on what needed to get done for, either before the end of the year or to prime for the beginning of the year. So once we got through the beginning of the year, then I was able to like loosen my tie a little bit and come back and say, okay, now where was I? 6 months ago. So.
Yeah, but no worries. We all know you're a busy man. Trying to wrangle all the responsibilities that come with the job at Activision. Again, I thank you for accepting the invitation. And before I like to formally start, there is one thing I like your comment on, knowing that you're a big Ghostbusters fan. And this interview comes the day after Harold Ramis, one of the guys from Ghostbusters, unfortunately passed away. I just wanted to say, what comment does that merit you?
Well, I mean, first of all, it was totally unexpected. I didn't realize he was as ill as he was. I was lucky enough to interview him when they brought out the Ghostbusters game back in like 2000, what was it, 2008?
I think it was 2009, if my research
2009, yeah. I got a chance to do a phone interview with him when I was at OXM. And, I identified myself as one of those guys that takes it too seriously and dresses up. And, he laughed at that. But, it's kind of funny. I am such a public and vocal Ghostbusters fan that when that news hit, for one, I had trouble believing it, just because it seemed like very young. He wasn't even 70 years old.
Yes.
But again, not knowing about the illness, the family kind of kept that quiet. At the same time, sort of everybody that knew that I was a Ghostbusters fan sent me something about it. So it became extra weird. Like, not only was it bad news and I was bummed about it. Again, I didn't know him personally or anything, just knew what his contributions were to some stuff that I really enjoyed. It became a very morbid day, because everybody started hey, did you see this? Yes, I did. Hey, did you see this? Yes, I did. Did you see this fan art that people create? Okay, yeah, that's pretty cool. Hey, here's that fan art. No, yeah, I saw it. Could everybody just stop reminding me that Harold Ramis is dead? Thank you very much. It all came from a good place, but at the same time, it was kind of hard to not think about anything else yesterday because so many people know what Ghostbusters means to me. And that's the first thing they thought of was like, oh man, Dan Amrich must be really bummed. Yes. And I was.
I thought the same too. And I think the obligatory question comes next. Was he your favorite Ghostbusters or was it another person?
Oh no, I've always been an Aykroyd fan. Ray Stantz, the heart of the Ghostbusters. He's always been my favorite character. I love Egon, especially in the first film. I think that he provides a perfect comic deadpan foil to the other guys. But the truth is that the reason that Ghostbusters is the way that it was, like Dan Aykroyd created the franchise, right? But his early drafts of the script were simply not workable. Like they wouldn't be filmable. It wasn't a clear. It was a crazy supernatural fantasy, but it didn't necessarily like the script didn't really look like it was doable. So when Ivan Reitman got involved in the project, he recommended that Harold Ramis come in and work on the script with Aykroyd. And so a lot of the things that we think of as this is why Ghostbusters worked or this is why it's such a fun franchise, that's all because of Harold Ramis's script additions. The entire subplot of Venkman with Dana Barrett was entirely suggested by Ramis. So there's a lot of things that he did to sort of temper Dan Aykroyd's enthusiasm, especially for the supernatural stuff, because Ramis was a natural skeptic, whereas Dan Aykroyd believes in everything: ghosts, telekinesis, ESP, conspiracies. He loves all of that stuff and he believes it all. Whereas Harold Ramis is exactly the opposite. He was a total skeptic. He didn't believe in the supernatural. He wasn't sure that there was life after death. He didn't believe in ghosts. So, he was the anchor to make Ghostbusters seem so plausible, right? Because it's a crazy idea, but it would have remained a crazy idea instead of one that you could go, oh, okay, I get it. Supernatural janitors, because that's ultimately what they are. So, I think that Harold Ramis really helped ground that script a lot. And so that's, there's still talk about, are they going to do Ghostbusters 3? I don't care if they do Ghostbusters 3, but now I'm not sure that they'd be able to do Ghostbusters 3 without having his grounded sense represented. Yeah.
There was a chemistry that there's no denial at all. When Ghostbusters launched in theaters, I think I wasn't born. I think it was 84. We're thinking
it was 84. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't born by then. But I did manage to see the movie in the 90s. I have to admit, the movie thing is completely a guilty pleasure. I kind of had to listen to it every once in a while. But also, at least myself, I wasn't so much of a fan of Ghostbusters, but I did enjoy a movie that Harold Ramis also he cited as being producer and writer. There's a comedy mafia movie called Analyze This and That. I watched both movies. I greatly enjoy them. But then again, I'm usually a fan of Robert De Niro's work. So take that as you will.
Sure.
Another small comment. We're doing this recording in February, which happens to be the month of Daniel Amrich's birthday. So
I would little late. Yeah.
I would like to use this opportunity to also congratulate him in public. Am I allowed to
surviving?
Am I allowed to disclose the age, or
you may disclose the age? It's on Wikipedia, so I can't really hide from it. But I'm 43.
Yeah,
which means that I was 13 when Ghostbusters was in the theaters, and I begged and begged and begged and begged to go see that movie. And my mom finally did take me to go see the movie. And it was one of those rare things that when you're a kid, you look forward to something for so long, it totally lived up to everything that I was hoping it would be. So. I'm 43.
I kind of had that stage with the Nintendo 64, but I'm trying not to get sidetracked here. Okay, so I'm gonna take you on a passage to time, and I'm gonna start. And I'm gonna start with your time at Ithaca College. From what I found out is that you were an active participant on the radio station that Ithaca has. How was the experience? How did you got an interest in it?
Well, that was actually why I went to Ithaca, because they had a really good radio program. When I was looking at colleges, I wanted to go into audio production, and my dad. It's funny. My dad's a computer programmer. He's retired now. He was a computer analyst, a systems analyst. So basically, he was called in to work on these major, massive databases on hardware that basically doesn't exist anymore. But before that, he was an audio engineer. So I grew up around audio. My dad had a really nice hi-fi. He had a, reel tape machine and stuff like that. So I was into music and I was into audio, and it just sort of seemed like that would be fun. And when I went looking at colleges, a lot of colleges have college radio stations. Ithaca had two. They had one that was, like traditional college radio, alternative in the early 90s. So playing a lot of Cure and Smashing Pumpkins and stuff like that. And then they had a second radio station that was classic rock and current metal. And I was like, okay, it's always more fun if you can work on a radio station where you actually enjoy the music. Not all professional on-air talent gets that luxury, but I was like, well, hell yeah, Led Zeppelin and Van Halen and Beatles, and then like all this new rock that was coming out in the early 90s. I wound up going to Ithaca basically because I thought that their media program was great. They had a brand new school of communications. So I was part of the first class to use this new building and all these new facilities and brand new tape machines and brand new video gear and the whole bit. And it wound up that, my minor was writing, and that's what worked out. But my first love was always audio, and it's why I still podcast now, because I have an excuse, like digital wasn't there. So I went to college, and I was learning on all analog equipment. I learned how to cut tape with a razor blade and mark it with a China marker, and I'm happy to say I felt pretty good. I got really good grades in audio. I was a decent audio engineer, and then the minute that I graduated, the world went digital. So now I had to things like mic placement over a drum kit or mastering those lessons, the basic audio and the physics of sound. That all is still valid, but exactly the tools changed overnight, and suddenly I had to figure out how do you cut stuff on a Mac? How do you create audio on a computer? So I wound up sort of teaching myself, filling in the gaps, and I've got this diploma that's audio production, but you're frozen in time in 1993. So my claim to fame when I was on the radio there, I will somewhat embarrassingly admit that my air name was Dynamic Dan Amrich, which I thought you would get a kick out of. Yeah. There was a band out of Seattle that the alternative station was playing, and I said, "Oh, we gotta get this on our station," and they're like, "What? You want to put Nirvana on a classic rock thing?" And I'm like, "No, these guys, I've never heard them before, but this is totally this is the evolution of hard rock. This belongs on our hard rock station."
Indeed.
And so I picked right. It was the only thing I did right as music director. I put my foot down. I'm like, no, we're going to play Nirvana. This is going to be of interest. We started playing that record so early that by the time it went #1 in America, we had already been playing it for 3 months, and we had taken out of rotation. That song was over to us, and it was overplayed, and everybody loved it, but it was done, so we put it back in rotation. And I remember doing a little on-air promo about the fact that we had picked Nirvana right, and we picked a whole bunch of other things. I was like, it's our job here at the station to bring you new music first, and here's some of our recent successes. Who knows what we're going to play tomorrow, but you're going to want to hear. So yeah, that was upstate New York. That was Ithaca College to me. It was an audio major and a writing minor. And it just so happened that I got into reviewing media. I got into reviewing music, and I did I reviewed art and books and music and television and theater, and music just clicked because of my background. And before I had graduated college, I was published in local papers and stuff like that. It was off to the races.
Yeah, but before getting published in the local papers, I did found out, and I'd like to know the story. You'll correct me if this is wrong. I kind of read it in a blog of Ithaca that you actually had journalistic experience way before all the freelancing. And it was called, let's see what the fact sheet says, 10th Floor Tabloid.
Oh my God! Where did you find out about the 10th Floor Tabloid?
There was a blog in Ithaca that someone wrote an article about you, and apparently it was back in 2009. And
you need to forward this URL to me, because I want to know who the hell remembers the 10th Floor Tabloid. So freshman year, I lived in the dorms, and Ithaca has a lot of different dorms, but I wound up in the towers, and the towers were two 14-foot structures where the 13 of the floors were student housing, and then the 14th floor, the top floor, was a restaurant, and then I think some administrative offices. So I was on the 10th floor. I was fortunate that my first year in college, I had a room to myself, a private room at the end of the hall. But I was really concerned about not, meeting people. I didn't want to be that creep at the end of the hall that nobody knew. Turns out that the people on my floor, I'm still in touch with them because we're still good friends. a lot of them were musicians. So I came in with a couple of guitars, and I found myself on the floor with 3 other guitarists and a bassist. So sort of as we got to hanging out, it just occurred to me that I wanted to do like basically a 1-page zine. And I was constantly listening to people on the floor, and people would say funny quotes out of context. And so I would write them down, and then every couple of weeks I would write, I would just put together the 10th Floor Tabloid with like clip art and, very early desktop publishing systems. I mean, I printed out the 10th Floor Tabloid on a dot matrix printer and then took it over the library and photocopied it.
Whoa.
And my room was right next to the payphone. So a lot of people would read the 10th Floor Tabloid because they were like killing time on the phone with friends or something. So the 10th Floor Tabloid, I think I only did like 10 or 11 issues. It was 1 page. It was just an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. And I did like a 2-column thing. And I would just run quotes that people had said, things that sounded dirty out of context, in jokes for people that lived in the building, dumb jokes, just stuff like that. It was nothing serious. It just was like I had the free time to do it, so I wanted to do it.
Was this done with any premonition that you actually wanted to get into writing, something to build your skills, or something?
Absolutely
that you did?
Not. No, it was a joke freshman year, and it's funny, I've never even considered the connection between the 10th Floor Tabloid and then going out and writing for a living. I mean, I liked writing, but it was just supposed to be a joke for the floor. And I recently found, like a couple of years ago, I found a stash of the 10th Floor Tabloid, and I photocopied them and I sent them to a couple of my friends, and I was like, oh my God, do you remember this? And they were just like, I don't even know what half of these jokes mean anymore. I'm like, I don't either. But the fact is, some of them are still jokes between us. Like, that's how you form bonds with people. So yeah, that was the 10th Floor Tabloid. It was not intended to be I'll show the world that I can be a writer. It was, are you bored on the phone? Here are some jokes. That was pretty much it. And just like, jokes about people that lived there. I was just, calling people out. We also had practical joke wars. We were very, very polite, for all of the stories you hear about people getting raging drunk in college and destroying stuff. And my circle of friends was less destructive, but we were more creative. So we got into a practical joke war, and we set ground rules. Nothing that's actually going to call security. Nothing that was going to get you in trouble. Nothing that would cause permanent damage. Nothing that would cost money that you would have to get rid of. So with those, you had basic stuff like you're in the shower and somebody steals all your clothes. You wouldn't put them in the toilet or do anything nasty to them. You would just take them hostage. They would be dry, but you wouldn't know where they were. And it was the awkwardness of these floors were segregated by gender. So the 10th floor was all guys. The 11th floor was all females. So I had a lot of friends up on 11, and we would hang out in each other's rooms. But when somebody stole your clothes, they would take it up to a friend on 11, so that you would have to go up to the girls' floor in a towel. And dripping wet, and there's all these, cute college girls everywhere looking at you like a drowned rat, and you saying, please, can I have all of my clothes? One time I stacked up, my masterstroke was that we had a guy who, oh man, he was great. I'm not going to say him by name just in case he hears it, but
okay.
We labeled everything with Post-it notes. Like everything that he owned, his mattress, and we would put, it's not his name, but Bob's mattress, Bob's television, Bob's refrigerator, Bob's everything. And we went crazy. And like Bob's Led Zeppelin CD, Bob's Nirvana CD. And then what we would do was like, we opened some of his textbooks. And I remember writing Bob's page 142, knowing that he would not find that until 3 months later in the semester. So when he got to page 142, we were still pranking him. Something innocent, something with Post-it notes. He could peel them off and take them away. No permanent damage, right? It fit all the rules. To me, the guys on the floor, because I was in a single, they got contact paper and they put it on the frame outside of my door. So I had my window open. I always have liked cold weather, and this was in upstate New York, so that was easy. But I would leave my window open overnight. And one morning I woke up and I hear this like weird flapping noise outside. So I open my door and all that's facing me is the adhesive side of contact paper. And so now I'm trapped in my room. There's no way for me to get out. Everything that I could touch is sticky. And I'm in my bathrobe.
Oh,
like it was that kind of stuff. I took one guy, I opened up all of his CDs. And we just took them out. And again, we were all music fans, so we were very respectful of each other's property. But I just took all of his CDs out and put them back in random cases. Not a fingerprint on them. Absolutely no damage. But he went for his Frank Zappa CD, and it was Led Zeppelin. And he went, oh, haha, very funny. He went for Led Zeppelin, and it was the Beatles. He went for the Beatles, and it was Nine Inch Nails. He went for Nine Inch Nails. There was no pattern. So it took 10 minutes to do it. It took him 2 hours to put it back. But again, security wasn't called. Nothing was damaged. Nobody cost any money. It was, it followed all the rules. So we had a really, that's where the 10th Floyd tabloid came from, just because we were all good friends and I felt like documenting some of that ridiculous stuff. But I got mine too. I mean, they contact papered me into my and I stood there looking at it for like 5 minutes. Like, how the hell do I get out? Like, do I cut my way out? Do I just throw myself at the contact paper and then that I can, get it peeled off of me? And ultimately what I did was I poked away at the bottom corner and then crawled out on my hands and knees.
Oh my
God. But yeah, that was where the 10th Floyd tabloid came from, is that we were all freshmen and we were all sort of a like creative mind. So when we did practical jokes, it was nothing destructive. And then, we would jam at the end of the day and we would play acoustic guitar in the stairwell and whatever. It was a lot of fun.
I would like a PDF of that copy of the 10th Floor tabloid if you have it. I don't
have this PDFs. I still have. I think I have some paper versions. I'll have to look at home and see if I still have them. It won't mean anything to you, I guarantee you. It's...
but what you just described to me sounded so fun. It's like living your own real life version of Rockstar's Bully. Definitely.
Yeah.
I can.
Yeah, except a lot less. There was no punching.
Exactly. Less violent. Okay, moving on. Fast forward to graduation. You got a job offer from Harris Publications. And you started working at Country Guitar Magazine.
Guitar Magazine.
How was the story of you joining Harris Publications?
Well, I had started out as a freelancer, music reviewer. Mm-hmm. Some of what I did, in college, I was doing music reviews and stuff, and I wanted to do that for a living. I started contacting local guitar magazines, because I at this point I was in Trenton, New Jersey, and two of the guitar magazines were up in New York. One was in Manhattan, one was on Long Island. Mm-hmm. And at this point I had picked up guitar and I loved guitar, and I figured that would be the best, if I had shown an aptitude for doing reviews. So I figure, why not? And I started freelancing for Guitar World, and then they called me one day and they said, hey, we've got an opening for managing editor on country guitar. Do you like country music? I said, no. And they said, could you learn? Because they really needed somebody in that position. So I'm like, okay, sure. Yeah, it's a job at a major magazine. And so I would be able to continue writing about rock guitar for Guitar World, and I would be doing this country guitar stuff. So that's all it was, is it was a huge compliment that they liked my writing. And they liked the fact that I was really, I was anal about deadlines. Mm-hmm. Like if they said this is due Thursday, they would have it Tuesday, I didn't screw around. And I think that they appreciated that I was so serious about it, because you're used to freelance writers flaking on you, especially in rock music. Because they're like, oh man, sorry, didn't get around to it, It's like, well, man, we've got a, deadline. Well, man, I'll see what I can do, And whereas I was like, hello, here's your copy. Here's a review. Do you have any more things for me to review? I'd love to review for you. Mm-hmm. And these things are like $150 a piece. It's not money I can even pay rent with at this point. I'm still living with my parents. Mm-hmm. But it got me on the map as, hey, that guy's not an idiot. Maybe we should hire him. Mm-hmm. So that's what got me to country guitar. And then Country Guitar eventually folded. but I was at Harris for 3 years, and I got a chance to do a lot of different things, both video games and music, while I was there.
From the other magazines that I have here that you work on, I have Flux magazine, GameSport magazine, and let's see the other page. You managed to get into Guitar World, at least the online component. But before I get into the question of that, there was another venture that was started called AOL's Critics' Choice. You started writing about what was it? Technology, video games?
It's video games. It was. I originally had pitched them for music, and again, I was an AOL subscriber at that point. When I left college, I had been on the internet. What little there was. There wasn't a web yet, right? There was the internet. There was packets moving around, but the World Wide Web had not gone anywhere yet. Mm-hmm. Like, it was experimental. So I was in like IRC chat rooms and the occasional online game. They were all text-based games, mm-hmm. and I was using like hardwired terminals to get my email and stuff like that. It was fun if you could use your modem to log into the college computer and stuff like that.
I don't think I'm sorry. I don't think most people remember what the dial-up sounds like.
Oh yeah, Well, picture, if you will, even if you didn't dial up, like you would physically have to, if you didn't have a modem in your computer. Uh-huh. You would physically have to walk across campus to check your email. I know that's a completely alien thing now that we have smartphones, but that was my work-study job in college. Is I was babysitting the computer lab. So when students would come in and work on projects, I would have to deliver them their printouts, mm-hmm. or help debug their systems or whatever. But most of the time, I intentionally asked to work in the computer room in the gym. Mm-hmm. Because who the hell uses a computer room in a gym? Nobody. So I sat there and I played games like Scorched Earth and stuff like that. It was great. So
going back to Critics' Choice, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I was like, because I forget where I went off there. Okay. So Critics' Choice was a little media review site within AOL. And I just thought, if you're a freelance writer, you write to anybody and say, can I work for you? Mm-hmm. So I started doing a couple of a few rare movie things. They were primarily movies, but they wanted to expand. Mm. So I did a couple of music reviews for them, and I did 1 or 2 like home video reviews. And they contacted me one day and said, "Hey, do you like video games?" And I'm like, "Do I?" And so I wound up sort of running their video games section for free. For the first 3 years that I worked for Critics' Choice, I got no money. I got to keep the games I reviewed. But what I was building up was about 300 reviews with my name on it, and I was able to build my relationships with the PR people at different companies, and I would call them and say, I'm working for this place, Critics' Choice, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. I would like to get a copy of this game for review, and after a while, they realized I was serious, so a few companies took Also, I was saying, like, I'm on Critics' Choice on AOL, and at that point, people didn't know what AOL was. So they said, well, what's your circulation? Because everything in magazines was how many people are reading your book. And I said, well, I don't have exact numbers on Critics' Choice, but there are 300,000 subscribers on AOL, so any one of them can click on our content. Mm-hmm. And they went, well, that sounds pretty good. A lot of magazines have 300,000 people reading them. So that got me on the fast track, and I had PR contacts at Nintendo and Sega, and then also Capcom and THQ and Activision, a lot of the other biggies from the day, but it was all 16-bit stuff. So that really helped me. Once they would send me the reviews, I would then, knowing that a lot of them didn't have access to AOL because it was a pay service, I would print out my reviews on letterhead and fax it back to them, so that they knew that I had reviewed the game. Mm-hmm. And, hey, you sent me this free game. I didn't just do nothing with it. Here's the review. And the minute that they saw that, they're like, oh, this guy's for real. And then word got around, like, yes, Dan Amrich from Critics' Choice, yeah, he's a good guy. He'll send you coverage. He'll send you what he does on it. Because what I didn't know was that on the other side, on the PR side, they needed to build a weekly report that says, here's what I got for my game. Mm-hmm. Like, I got 3 1/3 previews in this outlet. I got a page interview here, whatever. They needed to continually justify their job. I did not know that I was helping them justify their jobs by sending in. I just thought I was being responsible. Thank you for sending me a game. Here's what I did with it. So, yeah, that was Critics' Choice. And when I left Critics' Choice to go to GamePro or to go to Digital Diner, they were really upset. Like the owner of the publication, because it was a small family-run business, Critics' Choice. And he wanted me to come to work for him full time. But I said, you know, I've got this opportunity to go to California and I'm going to be working with this legend, Andy Eddy. And, you know, and he was pissed. We have since patched it up, but he didn't talk to me for years. And it was just recently that I got back in touch with him and I said, I don't know if you're still angry at me, but I came across some of our old stuff and I just wanted to say thank you because you put me on the path to a really great career. And he's like, oh, I was never angry with you. And I'm like, well, good. You know, then time heals all wounds, you know?
Exactly. I kind of jotted down a question that I'll ask you later because it's too early to make the segue, but I'm going to go into Digital Diner. On the research stage, I barely found any type of information. Like, all trace of it apparently has been erased from the internet to research for posterity. So explain a little bit of what was Digital Diner.
So I was looking for ways to, again, I was a freelancer. I was hungry. I had goals. One of my goals was to write for Wired magazine, right? Because in the early 90s, that was the gold standard. If you could get something published in Wired, you were awesome.
Which you did, actually.
Which I did, but I did that by writing to a friend of mine, Zach Meston. And he was one of the first game journalists I knew of. And when I was in college, I was reading his stuff and going, no, see, the game journalism can happen. Like, this is a real thing. You can break down games the way that people break down movies and books. And so I used some of his work to argue my case to my college professor that video games was valid. So I wrote to Zach and said, hey, who's your contact at Wired? And what I got back was the editor-in-chief of the magazine that Zach had been writing for. I had gotten their emails mixed up. I didn't know this guy. It was Andy Eddy. And he said, well, I'm not Zach Meston, but any friend of Zach Meston is a friend of mine. Here's my contact at Wired. So, like, that's unheard of, right? Like, who is that nice? Andy Eddy is that nice. So then he saw that I actually got my piece in Wired, and he called me back a couple of months later and he said, hey, you know, I'm talking about doing a new magazine out here in the Bay Area. Would you be interested in talking about coming out and working on this with me? And so that was like, you know, the Pope says, hey, do you want to be an archbishop? You know, like it was just insane. So I moved to California with my wife, Kat, who at that point had never been to California and did not know. Like, she was working at Harris Publications too on completely different stuff. So that was a bit of a major risk for her. But that was what Andy was doing. He was working on this startup magazine called Digital Diner. Both of us did not particularly care for the name, and we tried to talk them into a different name. But the idea, the concept of it was Rolling Stone for the internet or Wired for your mom. It was supposed to be a mass market, you know, technology and games and the internet. Excuse me, this is where entertainment is going. Like, and we're going to show you what's cool. So our first issue had Michael Jordan on the cover and his hot new movie, Space Jam.
Oh, wow. Now I feel old.
Yeah. So the problem was, this was an awkward period of time when the print world was trying to leverage the digital world, but couldn't do it with any sort of authority. By the time that you got a magazine out, it was at least 2 months later. So you would have to sort of like, hey, here's a website that we found that we thought you'd find interesting. Or, hey, if you're into cooking, here's 10 websites that we found that would help you out. You know, like, who needs a print guide to the internet? Well, we thought people who aren't very internet savvy, people who didn't know how to use Alta Vista, or Yahoo, which were the only two big search engines at the time. This is all before Google.
Yeah, Google was 99, I think.
Yeah. This was like, we want to make the internet friendly and comfortable for you, but we're also going to cover things like, you know, technology as it's being used in Hollywood, because there's special effects movies, and here you go. So the company that owned Digital Diner was a mess. That's the short version. They went bankrupt. The guy that ran it got in a lot of legal trouble and disappeared. they couldn't cover my paychecks. They couldn't cover Andy's paychecks. The whole thing was a mess. But here I was. I had uprooted my family, and here we were in the Bay Area, and I was getting to the point where I didn't have a job. Like 5 out of 6 of my paychecks bounced in a row. And my landlord is like, what is going on? Oh. So Andy had worked at GamePro, and when I found out that there was, mind you, I was executive editor of Digital Diner. It was a national magazine, right? I'm second in command. When the GamePro opportunity came around, they were looking for an associate editor, which is one step above intern. It was a complete starter thing. I had already had 3-4 years in the industry at this point. And they were like, why do you want to work here? I'm like, because you guys would actually pay me to talk about games, whereas the other company, the people that were running Digital Diner was like, why are we talking about games? Like, they just didn't get their own product. So it was great because I got to learn a lot from Andy, and Andy and I are still very, very good friends. But at the same time, it was kind of a nightmare where we were living hand to mouth. So that's why Digital Diner isn't known, because they only wound up doing 2 issues.
What?
Because the company, the stupid company that owned the project didn't have the money to print the magazine. So it was a cart before a horse thing. And then we would write articles, and we would wind up having to rewrite the articles because they were out of date.
Yes, exactly.
And we would spend so much money making a product that nobody would ever see. It was kind of ridiculous. So that's why Digital Diner isn't out there, because we never even got as far as having a good website. We never put any content on the website. The company that owned Digital Diner went out of business, and Digital Diner itself barely made it onto newsstands. I left before the second issue got printed, and we were working on a third, and I don't think the third ever came out.
To be honest, I thought World of Warcraft magazine was actually the shortest print run the magazines that you were, but now that I know that it's Digital Diner, I'm kind of...
Oh no, Digital Diner is by far the shortest of the shortest lived permanent project. I mean, GameSport, you mentioned GameSport before. GameSport was a dedicated magazine on a quarterly schedule or on a biannual schedule, I'm not sure what it was, that was just to sports video games. And every issue was like, here's every football game that's currently on shelves. Then the next section, here's every basketball game that is out on shelves. And we would do interviews, celebrity interviews and stuff too. We got to interview Deion Sanders, who at the time was, an absolute phenomenon, and he was Sega's poster boy too. So, it was that kind of stuff, and again, I'm not really a big sports guy. I like fantasy sports. I like NBA Jam and stuff. I like silly versions of sports. I like basketball. But when it comes to I root for the Knicks, but that's about it. But again, I knew how to, at that point, I was learning how to put a magazine together, and I became executive editor of that. But that was really my baby. I was like, they tried to do one issue. They used a freelancer that we had recommended. This was sort of an offshoot of the Flux staff. And we had started to do it, and we figured, oh, okay, well, you're going to want us to do that. And one of the ad guys was just a total jerk. He's like, we didn't ask you to work on this magazine. We don't need you to work on this magazine. We've got our own plan. And what he had done was that marketing guy, that ad guy rather, had contacted one of our freelancers independently and said on the side, hey, don't tell Dan, but we want you to write this magazine for us. And this kid was a college kid that had no idea how to make a magazine. He was able to write articles for me when I was assigning them for him. So he said yes, and I don't blame him for saying yes, but I found him because he had written a FAQ on the internet, and I looked at his FAQ and I was like, this is great, we should print this. I contacted him and said, could we print your FAQ? We'll give you a couple $100. And he was like, oh my God, yes. But that was sort of like to the ad guys, that was like, oh, well, then he's a journalist. We can use him. He wasn't a journalist. They asked him to put together a 100-page magazine. He couldn't do it. And in 2 weeks before the thing was supposed to ship, that guy came back to us and said, all right, I don't want to hear anything, but we need you guys to bail us out of this, so we'll pay you. What do you say? You take over this project. And my partner in crime at the time, the guy who was really the brainchild behind Flux, said, I'm not interested in helping you. I offered to help earlier, and you said no. So F you. And that left it to me. And I'm like, I'll do it for the experience and the money, yeah. So then when they did a second issue of GameSport, that was my baby, and I was able to plan that one from the beginning, and the whole thing went a lot more smoothly. But yeah, that was crazy days. I learned a lot at Harris. It was very much like a dysfunctional family. Like people didn't get fired from Harris unless they really screwed up. People generally stayed there forever. And when I left after 3 years, when I went to join Digital Diner, one of my best friends on the staff said, "I thought for sure you were a lifer." And he meant it as a compliment, like, you're really compatible here. I can't imagine that you wouldn't stay. But I was like, well, I get to go to California and I get to work in video games full time, and you name it.
So now that we covered the face at Harris publications, we jump to GamePro. You already kind of told the story about how you got in. So what I want to ask is the origin of your personas. I have here Dan Electro, Bad Hair, and MC Squared.
Yeah. So at GamePro, it was the tradition to have a cartoon character that you wrote as, right? Everybody had a persona. And so it was tradition, but it came out of the very early days of the magazine. It was one of those garage startup projects. And I guess the first issue was like 1989 or 1988, something like that. And it was put together by like 4 people, but they wanted to make it look like it was put together by 12 or 15. They wanted to look big. So they all chose cutesy little nicknames that would appeal to the younger audience. And everybody wrote under like 3 or 4 different names. Mm-hmm. And when you have a successful product, because GamePro was very successful. At one point, the circulation was about 500,000. So 500,000 people are buying it, and then the pass-along readership makes that like 3 million people are reading it.
Oh, wow.
So you don't mess with that. That's where the names came from, and they're like, well, that's part of our brand, That's what makes us unique, is we have these characters. So when I came to GamePro, I was told, you have to come up with your character, and our creative director, Francis Mao, Francis was a comic book illustrator as well as the art director for the magazine. He'll draw you a character based on what you want, and it can be anything. All we ask is that it be something original. So I wanted to have a connection with my Guitar World days, and so I chose Dan Electro because that was at the time an obscure 60s budget brand of guitars that no longer existed. So it was originally the guitar brand is one word with a C. So I changed it to 2 words with a K. And I figured that way Dan is clearly, and because my name was Dan, and a lot of people at GamePro got accused of hiding behind cartoon characters. Oh, how can I trust your review if it's by a cartoon character? You won't even put your real name on it. But it was, I even asked, I was like, can we ditch these cartoon character things? And they're like, no, it's, so every time somebody new joins the staff, they ask, and we go back and we ask again, and they say, no, we have to keep them. So I wanted something that reflected my name. So if you looked at the masthead, if you looked at the people that made the magazine, you'd know Dan was a real guy. So I wasn't hiding. The guy named Dan is the guy named Dan,
I think that tradition. I'm sorry. I think that tradition was finally broken at I think in 2006 when the magazine was reimagined, I suppose. That's from what I found. Okay, yeah. So what about the story of Bad Hair?
Well, Bad Hair was just a pun. I never intended to have more than one character for that exact reason of credibility. Mm-hmm. Like the guy who was the editor-in-chief of the magazine, because he had been there for so long, he had like 7 or 8 characters. And I actually wound up being the guy that cared about that. So I made a master list of this is who everybody's characters were over the years, even if they only use them for 1 issue. Because some people would create something and then look at it and go, oh God, I never want to do that. That was a mistake. So Bad Hair is probably who I would have gone with if I hadn't already come up with Dan Electro. Because Dan Electro I kind of settled on. But Bad Hair was such a perfect pun. So he was an ill-tempered rabbit, like with a leather jacket and a toothpick in his mouth and sort of a Brooklyn accent. That's how I envisioned him, is he was this like grumpy guy, which is the opposite of my personality. Mm-hmm. But I notoriously have had sort of wild and woolly hair all of my life, and it's often been hard to tame. So the idea of, a bad hair day, I was living a lot of bad hair days. And then I thought like, oh, bad hair, like HARE, ho, ha, ha, ha. So I wound up using Bad Hair anyway because it was too good of a joke to let go, and it really fit in with the GamePro spirit of a joke that kids could get. And so what I wound up using, because I had him as sort of this tougher-edged character, I wound up just using him for retro reviews. Anytime they reissued old arcade games, I would do Bad Hair for the byline instead of Dan Electro. If it was a current game, Dan Electro would do the current games. If it was a reissue or something weird, you know, a lot of Japanese games, you know, then I would do it under Bad Hair. So I only use Bad Hair every once in a while. The funny thing is, if you go back and you find old issues and you look at the writing style, like the voice, it's clearly me. Mm-hmm. Like it's still the way that I wrote, the turns of phrase and the little jokes at the end. You know, that's just my natural writing voice. So it wasn't to hide behind anything. It was just sort of like, oh, that's fun.
Mm-hmm. I do have to make an admission. I think I have one of the really old GamePro, probably 2000 or something. That's what around the time when I was a subscriber to the magazine, and right. I didn't make the relation between Dan Electro, Bad Hair, Dan Amrich.
Oh no, you weren't supposed to. They were supposed to be different people. To the point where part of my job at GamePro, I was when I started, I was half the online editor and half a print editor. So I was like the PC section editor, but I also was looking out for the website and posting content to the website. And as a result, when we got a chat room, I became the moderator for the chat and also the moderator for the forums. Mm-hmm. One time, I logged in as both Dan Electro and Bad Hair in the chat room and got into an argument with myself just to keep up the illusion that Bad Hair and Dan Electro were different people. Because, you know, it becomes this Superman Clark Kent. How come we never see them in the room at the same time? And I realized in a chat room, I could do that. I could sock puppet and be myself twice. So I was going back and forth between a PC and a Mac, because we had Macs to do screen capture, but I had a PC for sort of like PC gaming and also, regular email stuff. Mm-hmm. So yeah, people never knew. So that when I left, I was there from 1997 to 2003. When I left, I told everybody, yeah, I was Bad Hair. And they were like, what? I actually did it in a puzzle on my way out. I sent a farewell note to the forums and let them know. And if you read the capital letters of every sentence, the first letter of every sentence, it spelled out, I am
Bad Hair. I think I managed to read that.
Yeah. So MC Squared was a very specific thing where I wanted to do a column. I felt that it was unfair that companies were using terms like dynamic tessellation and Z-buffering and anti-aliasing and technical terms to make you think this game is better because it has anti-aliasing in it. You know, and we're a little bit more savvy now, but at the time, consider, it was the early 2000s. People really weren't aware of how video games got made. And the Polygon era was slowly creeping up on us, right? Like 2005 was PlayStation. 1995 was the PlayStation 1 that had come out. So, people were used to Polygon games, but they were getting more and more advanced. So I said, we need to do a column in the front that just sort of breaks this down and puts it into English. So I would go out and find out, what the hell does dynamic tessellation mean? Then I would write a 200-word column as MC Squared, who was our, science guy. That's obviously the joke. Okay. And I would write that, and that's the only place that MC Squared ever appeared. And he was supposed to be an awkward, nerdy white rapper before awkward, nerdy white rappers actually became a viable genre of music.
So basically, Eminem owes you money, basically.
No, it was more like, I guess MC Chris would be the equivalent, or MC Frontalot. The idea that these guys are wearing their geek on their sleeve. Okay. And I just thought it would be funny. MC Squared, yo, check it out. I'm like the Einstein of rap. So. I would start columns without trying to, being very careful not to be offensive, but I would awkwardly use street lingo, like, fresh or whack, and even if it was outdated, that would make it even better, to show that he was even less in touch. It was very high concept. I don't think a lot of people got it, but that was, and I'm trying to remember what the name of that column was, but I had a specific name for, it was Geek Speak. That's what we called it. Because I wanted to break down these technical terms that nobody ever actually said. This is what it looks like to see a game that uses dynamic tessellation, and here's what a traditional game without dynamic tessellation looks like. So those were the only three things. Occasionally I wrote under the lab rat, which was one of the few shared handles when we reviewed peripherals. And I did a lot of hardware reviews, controllers and keyboards and things like that. Sometimes the lab rat would get used for that. And I think I wrote as the lab rat once or twice. But usually, except for the lab rat, everybody's name, everybody that you see in those magazines, that was one person. One person may have had multiple personas, but like nobody else ever wrote as Dan Electro. Nobody else ever wrote as Scary Larry except for Lawrence Nevis, like stuff like that. So we took that very seriously. We had our favorite characters. We had our main characters. And then, some of us had alternate characters too.
Okay. I kind of made the relation because I never... From off memory, I couldn't recall if MC Square was something used for the April Fool segment Lane Pro, because I didn't recall if reading an article about MC Square. I did remember seeing something about Lab Rap, but not about MC Square. But now that you made the clarification, I think the next question isn't really necessary. So I'm just gonna hop on.
All right.
Okay, so the Giga Game Pro ended. I did manage to read that it was sour. So I've said, maybe don't ask questions about that.
No, that's fine, because enough time has gone by. Basically, there was a change in management at GamePro, and the new guy. This is going to get personal, but I think it's worth putting out there. Kat was working. My wife Kat was working with me at Harris. And then she actually got hired by IDG, the people that owned GamePro, first to work on their PC magazine, which at the time was called PC Games. Then she wound up transferring over to GamePro eventually. But while she was at PC Games, I got hired at GamePro. So we were working in the same building, but not on the same projects. And then ultimately she came over to GamePro and we started working on the same projects. I really, really like working with Kat. And it's because we have compatible styles. There were a lot of times that we would do things in GamePro that I would write all the words, she would do all the design, and like 2 other people would see it and it would ship. But because we have that sixth sense of working with each other, I know when she needs me to cut words, she knows when I need her to do something different with design or give me more space or whatever. So it was really, really good. And that was a luxury that, I didn't want to give up. I love working with Kat, and some people cannot imagine working with their spouse. But for Kat and I, we're better with each other. We like working together. We challenge each other. We don't give each other any BS, frankly. We're very honest with each other, but we're very proud of what we create together. So new management liked me, didn't like her. Oh. There had been some people that kind of had it out for her, that made it sound like everything was her fault. There was your standard, I don't want to go into too much detail because it's not that interesting, but some standard office politics where, oh, that person didn't do what I wanted them to do, or they made me look bad, so I'm going to make them look bad. And so when it came down to it, Kat and I had an offer from Future, which is the people that made PC Games and OXM and all that stuff. They were doing a new division of custom publishing, which is a really fancy way to say advertorial. They would go to a company and say, we can make you a booklet that you can send out to retailers, or we can make you a magazine that you can send out to your fans, but it would be sponsored. Sega Visions was a classic example of custom publishing. It was a magazine that Sega paid IDG to make. Mm-hmm. So, that's fine. Another really good example is like, the World of Warcraft magazine was a custom publishing thing. At Gamer, was a custom publishing thing for Best Buy, because Best Buy, would you like your own magazine? Yes, I would. Mm-hmm. So any kind of publication like that's made that wasn't legitimately intended to go out, just the way that, EGM or GamePro or OXM goes out. Mm-hmm.
I would like to segue this, even though it wasn't on the script, but I thought you might have some kind of insight of it. Could Game Informer be considered something that GameStop commissioned, or were they an entity even before the GameStop acquisition?
I honestly don't know. I'm pretty sure that Game Informer existed before. But yeah, they sort of seem like they're in that middle ground. The thing that makes Game Informer much more like a normal magazine, not only is the way that they work, but they are no longer exclusive to you can buy a subscription to Game Informer. You can find it on like regular newsstands. You don't have to go to GameStop to pick it up. It's obviously many people get it that way. But, there was a time there that I would have said, yeah, that feels like a custom publishing project. Not that it takes anything away from their credibility, but yeah, that was sort of a custom publishing thing because it was their magazine, right? It was GameStop's magazine.
Yeah, I'm not really asking this to discredit Game Informer or try to feel some kind of
sure.
I'm merely asking this out of my curiosity for information because I kind of made the relation and I wanted to see if it's true or not. Okay.
Yeah,
so,
that's the same thing was, what was it? EB, before they merged with GameStop, they had their own magazine that Ziff Davis made for them. GMR magazine, and a lot of people that have gone on to some pretty major things worked for GMR, and that was exactly the same kind of thing. Like, we will have our editorial integrity, but we have an exclusive distribution deal through this retailer. So that's how it sort of straddles that line. They were their own magazine, but they were a magazine that you could only get in one place, and therefore it was supposed to draw traffic in,
Okay.
So Kat and I were working together, and we wanted to continue working together. And the short version was GamePro said they wanted me to stay on, but they didn't want, and they were like, we will not negotiate with two people, with a group. And I'm like, well, we're being offered something as a team. Like, Future wanted an editor and an art director that could work well together. So I was like, you don't have to negotiate with us as a team. Make us individually happy, and we'll stay. And they made me happy. And then they talked to Kat, and they did not make her happy. In fact, she left that meeting in tears because she felt like she was so completely unvalued. So I gave notice on the spot and immediately started packing my stuff because we knew we had this other option. I'm like, great, okay, if they don't want us, this other company wants us. That said, I'm still I'm not in touch with the guy that made that call. I still talk with all of the old editors whenever I can. Some of those people have gone on to some great stuff. Some of those people I interviewed in the book. But yeah, like those people are some of my best friends in life, from the GamePro side. So it was dark at the time, but time heals all wounds, and GamePro as we know it doesn't exist anymore anyway. There's nobody left to hate. So it's really just, you remember your friends and you remember the good times. It's like that with anything, I think.
Yeah. I did read the eulogy that the blog post that you posted when GamePro when GamePro dysfunction, I think you could say, and a part of me kind of and you didn't elaborate on it on the blog post, but I kind of heard it from some people too that it were sour times. So I was like, it's better not to ask, but if it's willing, I can't really say nothing about that.
Honestly, it's that way with any magazine, any job. You're going to have tough periods, you're going to have easy periods, you're going to have good memories and bad. GamePro was run as a pretty tight ship. It was lean. Everybody was working very hard, probably doing more work than they should have because they didn't want to add editors. And, that causes you to get bitter and burnt out after a while. And I was there for 7 years, and I was never bored during those 7 years, but I rarely had vacations that I could really relax over those 7 years. So, yeah, there's going to be dark times anywhere.
Okay, we're taking a break here. Hope you've been enjoying the interview so far. On the final part, we'll cover Dan's time at Future Media, all the way to his tenure at Activision. Please look forward for that. This has been Tyson Matsuki for the interview call. With nothing more to say, signing out. Goodbye.